All right, welcome everyone to today's webinar on SERDP funding opportunities. My name is Laura Mack and I will be moderating today's session. We'll get started in just a few moments, but while we wait for others to join, I just wanted to cover a few logistical items. Today's broadcast will be listen only. We'll have a question and answer period at the end of the presentation, and you may submit questions by using the Q&A box on the black control panel on your screen. You don't need to wait until the Q&A period to submit your questions. In fact, we encourage you to submit them in advance of that session. The phone lines will remain listen only throughout the presentation, so we won't be taking any questions verbally. And we also won't be able to answer questions about specific proposal ideas or technologies during this webinar. And lastly, if you run into any technical problems, you can also send your issues through the chat box, which is also on your control panel. And please note that the audio and the presentation of today's session will be archived on our solicitation webpage in case you would also like to refer to them in the future. And so today's speakers are Dr. Kim Spangler, the Director of SERDP, Dr. Andrea Leeson, the Deputy Director of SERDP and the Environmental Restoration Program Manager, Dr. Robin Nissan, the Weapons Systems and Platforms Program Manager, Kevin Heers, the Resource Conservation Resiliency Program Manager, and Dr. Dave Bradley, the Munitions Response Program Manager. Before I turn it over to Kim, I would like to remind you all that this is a listen-only session, and to submit your questions, use the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen. Kim, go ahead.
All right, well, if you are on the East Coast, good afternoon. For the rest of you, good morning or good day. Thank you all for joining us. I see we have a strong participation number here. Want to thank the program managers for joining us and for Noblest for their support in this webinar. So today kicks off our question and answer period for the FY2024 SERDP funding opportunities. What we'll be doing during this session is going over valuable info for those of you that are interested in proposing. Andrea, Dr. Leeson here will discuss more details on the proposal process. But as we go through this webinar, I encourage you to ask questions about the funding process, ask questions about the current SERDP solicitations, and the proposal submission process. So this is really a great time to go over these questions. We do have our upcoming symposium where we'll all be there. And if there are questions on, you know, how you could potentially, from a non-technical standpoint, propose to the program, that's a great place to follow up with any questions. But with that, again, please make this interactive, and I'm going to turn it over to Deputy Director, Dr. Andrea Leeson.
Great, thanks so much, Kim. And next slide. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to give you a little bit of overview on SERDP in terms of who we are and why we fund, what motivates the type of research we fund. I'll then give a little bit more specifics on the solicitation itself. And then towards the end, each of the program managers are going to discuss the specific statements of need that were released this year. So we represent the DoD's environmental technology programs. We have our companion programs, SERDP, the Strategic Environmental Research and Development Program, and ESTCP, the Environmental Security Technology Certification Program. And we'll only be talking about the SERDP solicitation today. The ESTCP solicitation will be released next year. So SERDP really is our science and technology program. That is what you would think of as a traditional research and development program. And ESTCP is the demonstration and validation program. Next slide. SERDP has been around for a long time, established in 1991, and it's really been designed to address our high priority environmental science and technology needs. Typically, we address DoD unique issues, particularly environmental issues that have a large cost impact to the DoD. Next slide. For those of you who are familiar for how the DoD looks at the research and development, SERDP essentially covers 6.1 to 6.3 sort of research, which means we fund basic or more fundamental research up to advanced development. And once you get beyond that to technologies that have matured and are ready to move into the field, that falls under ESTCP, which is the demonstration validation and moving into implementation. Next slide. So we have a few drivers that guide the sort of research we fund. One are our environmental and energy drivers, which include issues associated with the resiliency of our installations, range sustainment, issues such as wildland fire, threatened and endangered species. Next slide. And then we are also concerned with the reduction of current and future liability. Now that can include issues dealing with the impact from past practices, as well as controlling life cycle costs. In terms of past practices, that certainly falls under the area that I manage, which is environmental restoration, where we're dealing with groundwater, soils, and sediments that have been impacted by different chemicals of concern, including some emerging ones such as PFAS, as well as we're dealing with the UXO liability here. And under the life cycle costs, we're really looking at, I always consider this more the traditional pollution prevention area, where we're looking at eliminating pollutants and hazardous materials or methodologies in our manufacturing, maintenance, and operations. Next slide. So the way we manage our program are through these different program areas, weapons systems and platforms, environmental restoration, resource conservation and resiliency, and munitions response. And this is how you'll see our statements of needs released. Under ESTCP, we do have some additional program areas that are only under ESTCP, including energy and water, climate resilience. We won't be discussing those today. Next slide. But we also look at this in terms of our focus areas. So this is where we're really looking at the sorts of topics that we're addressing under SERDP. A large effort under PFAS and AFFF, which we'll be talking about later, installation resilience, corrosion and repair technologies, installation restoration, munitions response, sustainable energetics, and emissions and waste reduction. Next slide. Our program is really able to fund just about any type of organization, from DoD, facilities and labs, other sorts of federal organizations, and then a large amount in the private sector, including universities, consulting firms, industry, etc. Next slide. In terms of the solicitations we have released, we're dividing this into a core solicitation and a seed solicitation. So you'll hear us talking about this as we go along. Under the core solicitation, we have a number of different statement of needs, and we can award multiple awards per statement of need. The core solicitation then tend to be the multi-year proposals, although we can also accommodate a limited scope proposal under this core solicitation. And when you look at the statements of need, you'll see a description of the two types of proposals that we can accept under those. And under this, we'll have a broad agency announcement, and this is the one that's open to universities, industries, non-governmental organizations, and then we also have the federal call, which is the DoD or any other federal agency. Under the SERDP Exploratory Development Solicitation, or we will just be calling that SEED, these are for proposals that are valued at $250K or less and roughly a one-year effort. And this type of proposal, it's generally for high risk, more of a proof of concept sort of work. And this also has a BAA and a federal call. Next slide. So this is the overall process. This is for our core proposals. We are now at the point where we have released our solicitation. So we developed the statements of need over the summer, and I haven't really discussed the statements of need, but essentially those are a description of the research areas of interest. So you'll see that we have multiple statements of need that have been released this year. The statements of need are the same for the BAA or the federal call. We ask for pre-proposals first in early January. Those pre-proposals are just 5-page efforts, and the intent of that is so that folks don't have to put in the amount of effort it requires for a full proposal, because under the full proposal, it's a longer effort, plus it has a full cost proposal associated with it. So the pre-proposal is a smaller effort, and it allows us to see if what you would like to propose will fit within our area before you go to the work of putting in a full proposal. So we review those pre-proposals. We make a down select and request full proposals. Those requests come out to folks generally in early February, with full proposals due in early March. Those proposals will go to peer review. Once back from peer review, it comes to the SERDP Technical Committee for assessment of the DoD relevance. That selection occurs in the middle of the summer or so, and then those proposals must present to our Scientific Advisory Board in the fall. Next slide, please. Now, the seed proposal selection process is a little more streamlined. There's some of the same steps, but some of the key ones are not there. So we have released that seed solicitation as well, but we don't request pre-proposals. We go straight to a full proposal that's due in early March. The full proposal for a seed is a little bit shorter than those for a core. And then those proposals do not go to peer review. They are evaluated by the technical committee directly, again, though, in the same time frame, late spring to early summer, with the selections in July. And the seed proposals do not go before the Scientific Advisory Board. Next slide. So for the core solicitation dates, you'll see these listed here. They also are on our website. So the pre-proposals are due January 10th, 2023 at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. This is a hard deadline. You cannot be late for that. We don't accept late submissions. And I highly recommend not waiting till the last minute, just because if there are a lot of people and there's any problem uploading it, that is a difficult time to be doing it in the last few minutes before the deadline. We also have plenty of people available to help if you have any problems with our website. So please don't hesitate to reach out if you're having issues. The full proposal requests go out early February, as I mentioned, with full proposals due on March 15th. Next slide. So the seed solicitation dates are just slightly different, with those full proposals for seed solicitations due on March 14th, 2023. I'd like to emphasize too that the seed solicitation is a separate solicitation from the core. Now, under the core, you may have a limited scope idea. It has to be submitted under the statements of need of interest. If you have one that's very specific to a seed solicitation, submit it with these deadlines. And then those project initiations generally is early in 2024, the same for the core proposals. Next slide, please. We always provide the solicitation success statistics from the previous year, and you can see the numbers here. Generally, roughly about of the pre-proposals, 20% of those are requested to submit a full proposal, and I would say roughly 40% of the full proposals that are submitted are selected, and that number ends up being about the same for the core solicitation as well as for the seed. That can vary a bit each year, but this is about what we see on an annual basis. Next slide, please. So in terms of our selection criteria, I would like to talk about this a little bit. Most importantly, the very first thing we look at is the relevance. That does the proposal address the statement of need under which it was selected or under which it was submitted? And that is very important that you are addressing that objective. We very clearly lay out what are the objectives of that statement of need. If you have an idea and you try to shoehorn it into fitting the statement of need, it probably won't work. It is really important that you have a concept that will address the objectives that were released. We also look at it in terms of, is it appropriate for SERDP in terms of the level of research? If it looks too applied, that you've already completed most of the research on a particular technology and really you're ready to move into the field, it would not be deemed relevant for SERDP. So it's important that you are at the right stage of research. Technical merit is by far the most important metric that we look at after the relevance. Simply looking at the overall scientific and technical merit of the submission. But we also evaluate personnel and cost. And then once you get to the full proposal evaluation, we do look at your transition plan in terms of where you would go next with the research, how you would transition that research ultimately to end users. Does it need additional work under ESTCP or a similar demonstration validation program? That's the sort of information we're looking for. Next slide. The proposal selection criteria for seed proposals are fairly similar. Again, the relevance, are you meeting the objectives of the statement of need? Is the level of the what's proposed applicable for a seed solicitation? Technical merit absolutely is the most important metric again. And then we also look at transition potential. Granted, these are seeds, these are proof of concepts, but there should be some understanding of, if you pass the proof of concept, what would be the next logical step. Next slide. So in summary, what we're looking for and what we've seen with the most competitive proposals is that they very clearly address the statement of need. There is a very clear understanding of the state of the science and the background involved. Very important is that the work proposed is hypothesis driven, and hypothesis statements describing that you really have an understanding of what you would expect to see and how you're going to test that, and those hypotheses are woven throughout the proposed work and the tasks. And then that the technical approach is strong, that there's a detailed approach provided, clear experimental design is available. Next slide, please. Okay, so then at this point, what we're going to do is go into a brief description of the statements of need. These are all provided on the website, so we're not going into tremendous detail. Each program manager will cover a little bit about the statements of need that have been released under their program area. In each statement of need, you will see at the bottom of the description a point of contact. That is the relevant program manager for that statement of need. We are going to answer questions at the end of this webinar. If your question is very detailed, though, it may be more appropriate to contact the program manager outside of the context of the webinar to talk about that. It should also say that when you have a question about the statement of need, we're very happy to answer any questions about the process, or if there's something that you don't feel is clear about the statement of need. What we cannot do is, if you ask us to comment on your idea for the statement of need in terms of whether it's a good idea or relevant, that's the point of the pre-proposal, so we can't comment on specific pre-proposals at this stage. So I'm going to start with presenting the environmental restoration statements of need. Next slide. This year we have 6 statements of need under environmental restoration, all dealing with the issue of PFAS. And I'd like to say, I'm going to ask Laura to put in the chat a link to our PFAS and AFFF page on our website. At this website, you can browse through that and see all of the previous projects that we've funded before. And that is always helpful for understanding and putting into context where you might go with your proposed effort. Next slide, please. So the first statement of need I'd like to discuss is this one on improved sampling and analytical methodologies for PFAS in the environment. We have been working on a number of different improvements to sampling and analytical methodologies, but we'd like to take this a step further, particularly looking at some field methods where we can rapidly screen for PFAS in the field, and then improving some of the laboratory preparation and analysis methods. One item also that we're particularly interested in is getting some better sampling methods specific to particular matrices, particularly under thermal treatment, stormwater sampling, surface water, and sediment sampling. So those are the sorts of items we're interested in. Next slide. And next, we are also looking at an improved understanding of the fate and transport of PFAS in the subsurface. As I'm sure you're aware, this is an area of interest to you. There's been a lot of work in the past several years on the fate and transport of PFAS in the subsurface. And this statement of need is specifically attempting to look at some of those data gaps, trying to understand more thoroughly what is going on with PFAS in the subsurface. And so listed below are some very specific sub-objectives of some of the areas of interest to us. And both this statement of need as well as the previous statement of need on sampling and analysis all provide a basis for improving our methods to treat PFAS in various matrices. Next slide. So our next 4 statements of need are focused on improving different technologies for treatment. So this first one is working on improved concentration technologies. That certainly will cover, for example, the various sorbents that are used for treating PFAS in the environment or for concentrating PFAS in the environment. But we're also looking at that a little more broadly and looking at soil amendments particularly for these larger area applications. Next slide. We also have a statement of need out on improving destructive treatment processes, but I have to clarify, this is specifically for non-thermal destructive treatment processes. We have another statement of need that will be focused on thermal technologies. There's a number of sub-objectives here, all geared to improve these non-thermal destructive treatment processes. Next slide, please. As I said, this is our statement of need that is on thermal destruction processes. Thermal destruction processes have been very successful for PFAS. They have been around for a number of years. What is proposed here is very specifically to address some of the data gaps in these thermal destruction processes so that we can further improve our ability to treat PFAS with various types of thermal destruction technologies. Next slide. This is a statement of need that is really on the self-assembly behavior of PFAS in the subsurface and dealing with these supramolecular systems that potentially we've seen develop on or within environmentally relevant media, particularly with the legacy AFFF. Next slide. And then at this point, let me turn it over to Dave Bradley, who is going to discuss our munitions response program.
Thanks, Andrea. Hello and welcome, everybody. Just a couple of quick statements for clarification for munitions response. Wide area and detailed survey technologies are driven by an operational reconnaissance and return for location and identification of unexploded ordnance. The second and last statement actually has to do with cost-effective recovery and disposal. Those methodologies are now constrained significantly and driven by requirements to protect both marine life and to not disperse explosive constituents into the environment. And with that, I will turn it over to Kurt Preston.
Dave, this is actually going to be Kevin Hires. I'll introduce myself. I'm the incoming program manager for resource conservation and resilience. We have a very broad portfolio of research we support out of this program. And this year we have 3 statements of need that represent that breadth. First, next slide. is advanced wildland fire research to improve military land use efficiency. This year continues our investment in wildland fire research, specifically in the area of smoke production, transport, and phytochemistry as it ages, relevant to management of DoD lands. Of course, DoD is one of the largest users of prescribed fire nationally, and knowledge gaps related to smoke production, dispersion, transport, and aging are critical to the sustainment of prescribed fire on DoD lands. We've included in the statement of need a reference to a recent scientific assessment of wildland fire smoke, Peterson et al. 2022, which helps frame the emerging and persistent research needs in this area. Next slide. We also are asking for proposals under the statement of need on threatened, endangered, and at-risk aquatic, amphibian, and reptile species response to multiple stressors. This statement of need focuses in on at-risk, threatened, endangered species in those categories of aquatic systems, aquatic species, and specifically aquatic species, amphibians, and reptiles that are experiencing these multiple stressors. In particular, we want to emphasize that proposals responding to the statement of need should identify specifically those multiple stressors that will be assessed, how they interact to affect conservation of these species specific to those proposals, and then how those species are relevant to the DoD mission. And specifically, we've given some examples of species at risk that would fit this statement of need. For the last statement of need, next slide, I would like to introduce Kurt Preston, who's the outgoing program manager for resource conservation and resilience, and will be taking over programming at resilience as part of his transition. I would like him to introduce the last statement of need.
Hey, thanks, Kevin, and welcome aboard. I know I'm handing over the resource conservation program into good hands. So for the last statement of need, the improved methods to determine coastal vertical land motion. You know, observational coverage of coastal vertical land motion has really improved dramatically over the last couple of decades with the global navigation satellite system. But it has some limitations due to distances between stations, distances that result in data gaps, and really the historical fact that the timescale and length of record for the global navigation satellite system is not extensive. And then on the other side, you know, the satellite-based interferomeric synthetic aperture radar, INSAR analysis, has begun to fill those gaps between the stations and providing indication of spatial variability on rates of vertical land motion. However, the INSAR records are even of a shorter temporal history, and that has given rise to uncertainty with regard to vertical land motion. So, you know, in short, while observational coverage has improved, the methods used to project vertical land motion and available VLM observations all have limitations. And what we're really looking for is and what we're really inviting is proposals to overcome those shortcomings so that the Department of Defense has an improved ability to determine future trends associated with sea level rise at their coastal installations. So with that, I will turn it over to my good friend and colleague, Robin Leeson, and Weapon Systems and Platforms.
Thanks, Kurt. So in Weapon Systems and Platforms, let's see, we have 6 statements of need this year. And I will mention also that Dr. John LaScala and I will be covering any questions that come up in these areas. John is the incoming program manager, and I'm the outgoing program manager. So with that, let's go to the next slide, please. Biological impacts to DoD coding performance. We've done a lot of work in the past on coding system, paints, and other coding systems of interest to the DoD. In this particular statement of need, we're concerned with biological impacts. So fungal, but also marine environments. We have the potential for consortia and other things attacking our coding systems, and we want to gain more more insights into how that happens, the mechanism, and what we might do to mitigate. Next, please. So we have a couple of PFAS oriented statements of need. And this one, as we have in the past, we're looking for alternative formulations to take the place of AFFF and to eliminate some of those PFAS that we have been using in the past to fight fires. And what we're aiming at now, we think we've got land pool fires sort of under control with some of the commercial materials that are available. We've been testing a lot of materials, testing a lot of different formulations and different ingredients, but we want to expand that and make sure that we're covering all the potential needs of the DoD. So think naval systems and methodologies for putting out fires that are, let's say, alcohol fuel fires and other fuel fires. So we're looking for the next generation of PFAS-free firefighting formulations and looking for more ideas in these areas. Next slide, please. So many of you are aware of what we do, let's say Patagonia and other clothing that we wear to eliminate the potential for water and oily substances getting from the exterior to the interior. A lot of those tend to be PFAS-related materials. So that's the best way to keep water out and to keep oily substances out. And we're looking for materials that do not have PFAS and can still be applied to military fibers and military coatings, textiles. So new materials is what we're looking for, things that will work for our military and provide them with the kind of protection they need. Next, please. So training and testing with PFAS-free firefighting formulations. These materials don't behave the same, and we need to learn how to use them better, and we need better methodologies for understanding how these PFAS-free firefighting formulations are working, and therefore what we can do to improve how they work and improve the training that is involved in using these new PFAS-free firefighting formulations. So that's our next statement of need, and let's go to the next one. Low global warming potential, fire suppression agents. So we need to extinguish fires. We need to, and the materials that we have been using, of course, have been first CFCs, then HFCs, and we're looking for alternatives that can put out fires in engine nacelles and other occupied areas of military ground vehicles. So alternatives that don't contain HFCs or CFCs. Last one. Sustainable energetic synthesis. So advanced synthesis methodologies, which reduce the amount of solvent, which improve the potential for making things in a more environmentally sustainable fashion. We've done this in the past, and we continue to look for technologies and methodologies that will improve synthesis of energetic materials. And with that, next slide, please. I want to make sure that everyone knows that we have a symposium coming up the end of this month, November 29th through December 2nd at the Marriott Crystal City. And want to make sure you know about it. And it's a great chance for you to discuss some of these SONs with your colleagues and put together your proposals and get them in by that deadline of January 10th. With that, I think we're up for questions.
Yep. So we've received a number of questions. So we'll get right into those. So starting with this first question for Andrea, Is there a typical or expected technology readiness level for technologies proposed under the seed and core solicitations?
I would say no. We're not generally that rigid. Roughly technology readiness level from 1 to about 4 is appropriate for SERDP. Occasionally, particularly under the weapons systems and platforms area, they will state an expected technology readiness level, but most of the statements of need are not like that. Thank you, Laura.
Moving on to another question for you, Andrea. Are preliminary data needed for proof of the concept in a seed proposal? If a seed project is considered successful, what are the next steps for the project?
So let me address the first one. In terms of needing supporting data or preliminary data for a proof of concept, it's not required. But the proposal does allow for a small appendix where you can provide some preliminary data if you have it. Certainly you want to show in the proposal, you have some basis to believe that your idea has a shot. And so that could either be in the form of preliminary data, or perhaps you are combining some existing technologies in a new way, but you would want to have some basis to describe your concept. For the second one, in terms of what are the next steps, what we do is after the proof of concept is completed and we have the final report, we will have you give a presentation to the SERDP staff as well as to our technical committee. At that presentation, you provide an overview of the results of the project, and then generally you have a couple of slides to talk about where you think you can go next. If the project was successful and you met your goals, then typically you would want to propose for a follow-on effort, a full-blown effort under SERDP, like an additional 3-year effort or something like that. So we have a process for that. You would not have to go and under the annual solicitation. We have a separate process for a follow-on, where if the staff and the technical committee agree that the results are promising and additional work is warranted, we would ask for a proposal that would go through peer review, and essentially at this point go through the traditional processes of selecting a proposal. So peer review back to the technical committee, and then if it's approved, it would go to the scientific advisory board. So that's the basic process. Back to you, Laura.
All right. Just looking at a couple more. All right, so I'll give you another one, Andrea. Can a PI submit multiple proposals?
A PI can definitely submit multiple proposals. We do not have a limitation on that. The limitation is that it's when you submit a proposal, you do have to select a statement of need, a single statement of need. So you can't select multiple statements of need. You'll need to choose, which one it's most relevant to. It's also, this is completely on you in terms of what workload you want to give yourself. But it's definitely a workload issue as well. If your pre-proposals are selected, that we request a full proposal from you, the full proposal is quite a bit of work. So that may be something you want to consider when you're putting in pre-proposals. Back to you, Laura.
This is a question for Robin. Could you give some more details on the type of codings for the biological impacts on DoD coding statement of need?
Yeah, sure. So we are interested in coding systems, not just for, let's say, the marine environment, for underwater and above water. Think of biofouling, that kind of coding. We are interested in that, but we're also interested in coding systems on aircraft and land vehicles, where we've noticed that, fungal and mold infestations, if you will, are occurring and are having an impact. And it's basically not just the mold and fungus, but what they're doing to that surface, what the change that is occurring and how fast that change is happening. So we're interested in all aspects of biological impacts to DoD coding systems, land, underwater, above water, you name it. Over.
All right, this is a question for Andrea. Regarding detection or monitoring of PFAS, how does SERDP consider the analysis of total PFAS versus individual PFAS compounds in the environment? Does SERDP have any preference for PFAS detection in surface water, groundwater, or soil?
So analysis of PFAS in the environment, the methodologies have come a long way recently. We typically ask proposers to look at individual PFAS, preferably for method EPA draft method 1633. We make some exceptions, depending on the specifics of a proposal, but that would be something we discuss if the project were selected. EPA method 1633 can measure 40 different PFAS, so that is definitely the preference. In terms of a preference for PFAS detection in surface water, groundwater, or soil, method 1633 has different methods depending on the matrix, so it would really depend on what your technology is addressing. If you are addressing a groundwater technology, you should be following the groundwater methodology. Detecting, if you're working on soils, definitely you need to be using a methodology for soils. Back to you, Laura.
All right, this is a follow-up question for Robin. Can you elaborate on the chemical composition of those coatings?
Yeah, generally urethanes, polyurethanes, epoxies, siloxanes. I mean, standard paints is what we're talking about. And I'd include in that CART coatings as well. So chemical agent resistant coatings. And John, did you have something you want to add to that?
I'd say I think there are some modified alkyds that are used still to some degree, but the list that you said are exactly right. And absolutely not latexes or coatings like that are not used on weapon systems and platforms.
All right, a more general question for Andrea. Does the PI need to be a US citizen?
No, we do not have a requirement that proposal authors must be US citizens. Back to you, Laura.
All right, and another more general question for you, Andrea. What is a typical funding amount for a core proposal?
I usually answer this by saying we do not have a typical funding amount. We expect proposers to propose the amount they need to complete the proposed effort, your scope of work. So that means that funding amount can vary wildly. And it's something we look at, that your level of effort in the proposal appears to be commensurate with the cost requested. Having said that, we typically fund roughly 3-year projects, and that funding amount can vary from $200,000 to $400,000 a year, but that is strictly a ballpark. Laura?
Right, this is a question for Kevin. If we are working with wildlife, how critical is it that we work on or with a military base?
Well, certainly working with wildlife, the species or ecosystems, and in this case, multiple stressors, need to be highly relevant to DoD landscapes. The work itself does not have to be performed exclusively on DoD lands, but identifying managers and military installations of interest, even getting letters of support is highly recommended.
All right, and another question for either Kevin or Kurt. Is research on the management of non-native invasive species funded by SERDP?
It is, and as Kurt can attest, it's been a large part of the portfolio over the number of calls of the last few years. I would imagine that as it relates to this statement of need on multiple stressors, exotic species could represent a stressor as part of the framework for successful proposals under the statement of need. Kurt, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, Kevin, you hit the nail right on the head. It certainly could be a component. Over.
Great. Another question for Andrea. Is the page limit for limited scope proposals the same as for standard proposals? And does it go through the same process? And then related question, is there any requirement for preliminary data for a limited scope proposal, or is a feasible technology concept sufficient for review?
So since you're using the term limited scope, I'll assume that you understand the limited scope is part of the core process, and submitted to the statements of need that are there under the core solicitation. So the limited scopes, everything is the same for them in terms of the page length, the format, etc. So yes, that is the same. And it goes through the same process. The only part it does not go through is that for limited scope, it stops short and does not go to the scientific advisory board for final approval. Only the standard proposal, the larger ones, go through that final step as well. In terms of the need for preliminary data, I would say that's very similar to what I said with the seed proposals, in that some basis is useful. And as your question said, is a feasible technology concept sufficient? That should be sufficient. If you've clearly laid out and made the case for your proof of concept, that would be sufficient. If you have preliminary data, if you've collected something, as I said, the same with the seed proposals, we provide for being able to include a brief attachment with preliminary data, so you could also do that. Back to you, Laura.
All right, another more general question, Andrea. Are we allowed to identify and partner with a specific installation or facility when developing and submitting a proposal?
You can absolutely do that. That is often done. It is not a requirement. So if you are a proposer who doesn't have those sorts of relationships with installations, don't worry about that. If you do need access to an installation, we do assist with that. So it's not a requirement, but if you do already have, or you would like to create that partnership, you're more than welcome to. Laura?
I believe this is a question for Robin. For low GWP fire suppression, what do you mean by blast pressure must be less than 4 PSI, as the blast pressure depends on the operational environment?
I'm going to have to get back to you on that one. Please provide me with the information and I will post an answer. But what we're talking about is an environment, let's say inside a tank or something like that, and an incoming causes a fire and we need to put that fire out quickly. And so we're doing so where there are people present as well. So that's what that is. In terms of the blast pressure, the specifics of that, I have to look that up and get back to you with an answer. And I'll open it up to John if he has something to input on that.
No, nothing else to add, Robin. I think you covered what I know on that as well.
All right. We're not receiving too many more questions, so these last few might be the end. Just received one for either Kevin or Kurt. Given the challenges of getting sufficient sample sizes for threatened, endangered, and at-risk species, would it be okay to propose to work with related non-TERS as models in addition to the TERS? I don't know if that's the acronym that you use, but threatened, endangered, and at-risk species.
No, I think that as long as there's a compelling case for the applicability of species that are analogous to the threatened or endangered species or at-risk species of focus, I think that could be perfectly allowable, particularly as it relates to the theme of multiple stressors in this call. Kurt?
Yeah, no, Kevin, I agree wholeheartedly. Again, you hit the nail on the head.
Back to you, Laura.
All right. I don't see any more questions coming in. So I will start to wrap this up, and just wanted to do so with a reminder that if you do have any specific SON questions, you can also reach out to the program managers about those. And also a reminder that this recording will be available on the website, and so are the slides for this presentation as well. And then Kim, Andrea, did you want to provide any final reminders or anything like that?
No, we just thank you all for joining us. Our success depends on your hard work in putting these proposals in, and not just our success. Certainly what I mean by that is the capabilities that we're going to be able to give to our nation's lands and the equities of the Department of Defense. So I'd like to thank the program managers for doing an excellent job conveying the problem statements. We're very careful to describe the problem, but not prescribe the innovation. So looking forward to the folks here on the line, using your ideas and your innovative approaches, and looking forward to reviewing those, and encourage you to share the solicitation call with your colleagues as well. So we do really welcome diverse viewpoints. We fund most types of scientists and engineers on the SERDP program, and certainly welcome folks to be new proposers to this program as well. So Andrea, over to you if you have anything else.
No, I don't. I think you said it all clearly. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending today. And as Laura said, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you.
All right. We hope to see you all at the symposium here in just, I guess, 2 weeks.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Take care.